for attending. And we're so happy you can be with us. We know how crazy school is getting at this time of the year. So thank you for making time for this. And I know it means stepping away from your kids and everything else that's on your mind. But as you know, this series is about promoting language development and expanding L's. And today we're going to move away from the thinking about the sentence unpacking, and we're going to move on to thinking about developing vocabulary. And actually, I told you last time that I did the sentence structure first because I think it's our tendency to always think of vocabulary, but then we want to be thinking about the right thing when it comes to vocabulary in terms of, well, what are the needs of expanding L's? They already have a lot of vocabulary in English, so what's left to do? And so that's what we'll be talking about, how we can move forward. And as you know, we always have a Padlet for the PDs. This is the link to the Padlet. I hope you've been there already. This time I went a little overboard, putting almost everything on the Padlet that you might want to have downloaded. And but that was so that it would be easy for you. And also, you know that after today, we will send out the PowerPoint link to you. And so we'll definitely be doing that. And we do tape this session, so we will also send that to you as we always do. But you have to give us a couple of days because it's very busy right now at the Arburn. So, but we will get it to you. And I do want to remind you that if you would like to have the PowerPoint separated from whoever is speaking, you can click under view options at the very top of your screen. You should see that. Click on side-by-side mode. That will put the PowerPoint on the left and myself or whoever's talking on the right. And so just as a reminder, on April 19th, we worked on unpacking sentences. And this is something we want the kids to eventually be able to do independently, to be fearless when they encounter complex text, and to have strategies for how they're going to try to tease it apart, knowing that there's a lot in the sentences that are very challenging for them. And so last time we talked about text complexity and what contributes to it. We talked about how when you're reading a novel, you need to identify the most important fields of knowledge to build before you teach it. And because we were talking about To Kill a Mockingbird, we talked about things like the South, Southern way of life, the Jim Crow era, the Great Depression. We talked about courtroom life and who's involved in a trial, and just the whole judicial system in the United States, which could be new for some of our kids. And then we went into the strategies of language dives, juicy sentences, and a couple graphic organizers that I shared with you for unpacking lengthy and dense descriptive passages. So that's what we did. And then we talked about all of that the last time we were together to see how it was going for you. And today we'll talk about vocabulary demands because, again, we want the kids to be able to handle these complex texts independently. They're not going to get to be commanding if they can't. And then when I see you on June 3rd, I'm going to give you some things to practice again. I don't think they'll take up a lot of time. I know it's getting, your schedules are getting very demanding now at the end of the year, but I think the things that I'm asking you to practice won't take up a lot of time and should fit into whatever you're teaching. So here's where we're going to go today. First, we're going to talk about direct teaching of vocabulary. When you're teaching vocabulary, what are the types of vocabulary you should work on? And then that would be with the front loading. Then we'll look at a couple word analysis tools, because when you're hunting for the academic language within a novel, within a narrative text, you want to be able to find it easily. And so it's good to have search tools for that. And so we'll look at two. Then we want to talk about word consciousness, because this is a very big skill to build in expanding L's. We need to whet their appetite for getting curious about words, for wanting to know new words, for doing things to find out the meaning of words that feel new to them, within reason, right? Like, we don't want them to have to feel they have to look up every word that they don't know, but rather we would like to create this interest on their part in looking up some words that seem like they might be useful in the future. And a big, big thing that we want to make sure Expanding ELS can do is to use the context clues around words that they don't know, and to be able to do that independently without guidance, to see if they can have a hunch about what words might mean, a good hunch about what words might be. And then if all else fails, of course, they can look the word up. But then when we think about vocabulary, we also want to think about active practice of vocabulary. And so it's tempting to just offer them words and definitions, or tell them to put the word in a sentence, even a sentence that's related to the novel that you're reading, and then say, good, okay, I taught that word. But they didn't get any practice, because it's not very much practice to just write the word down and write its definition. And it's also not very memorable. Why should I hold on to that? So we want to think about ways of practicing the vocabulary that's likely to get it into their system and make it theirs. So basically, the thing that we've been focusing on last time and today is that for Expanding ELS, our goal as their teacher is to help them become independent text processors. And we actually want to let them in on the secret, like, hey, what I'm trying to do with you is to not need me. I'm trying to make it so that you are fearless when you look at new text, even though, of course, you're going to find a lot of words that you don't know and some sentences that are really hard to understand. But I want you to have strategies to go after them. And certainly I'm here to help, but it's important for you, for your move forward in terms of proficiency. In order to get to the commanding level, you have to be independent, because when you're not in ESL anymore, then you're not going to get a lot of assistance. You're going to need to provide yourself with your own assistance. And so last time we talked about how we want them to have strategies to unpack sentences, to take them apart into chunks or phrases all by themselves, and then to offer them a couple graphic organizers or protocols that they can use to be systematic when they're taking sentences apart. And in our classrooms, we want to give them sufficient practice with things like language dives and juicy sentence unpacking. We want to give them enough practice that it just becomes second nature. They feel confident that they can do it. We can't just show it to them once. We have to do it a lot so that it just becomes routine. And they go, yeah, okay, I get it. I know what to do. I don't need help. Thank you. And that they start pushing us away. And today we're going to talk about how they can go about acquiring new words on their own so that they can expand their vocabulary. And what we're after are much more precise words. We want to get very vivid and precise and refined words into their system, not the everyday words. And we also want to help them when they encounter a word that they don't know, to see the clues around the word and the clues within the word, or maybe the way that the word is being used. So the function of the word in the sentence, which is more grammatical unpacking, or to look around the word and to see what the word means. And so today I'm going to give you strategies for this second part. And I want to remind you, and certainly I want to remind myself, if ever I'm back in the classroom, that it's my job to teach the kids how to do this. Like, how are they supposed to do it if they don't have any strategies? So that's my job. When I have Expanding ELS, I should be about this work of making them more independent. And I want to give them really obvious, concrete strategies that they can be using in order to do this work and elevate their proficiency to the commanding level. Not because the goal is to get out of ESL. ESL is a very pleasant place, but we want to have them so that when they're not with us now at the expanding level and into their futures, that they feel really, really secure, that they know how to tease apart new English words and phrases and figure out what they must mean. So where I thought I would start, and I put this sample on the Padlet, is to show you a sample from a fourth grade male student whose family is Hmong and he speaks Hmong and he's expanding. And these were the scores he got here in Rhode Island. And what he was told to do was to write a paragraph summary on what he learned about a women's right to vote in the United States. This was during the time of the 19th Amendment. And to remember to begin with an introductory sentence, to include examples and details, and to have a concluding sentence. Never mind he's a fourth grade student, because you could get him in the fifth grade and he could come with this sample, something that he wrote in the fourth grade. And then you want to be able to look at the sample to say, what does this kid need help with? Wow, he's already expanding. That's great. He's overall expanding, and look at his writing. He's almost commanding. I don't know that the way the scores work in Rhode Island is how they work in New York, but 4.7 is almost a 4.8, which exits kids in Rhode Island. So, but what I want you to be thinking about, and I've highlighted these words for you in yellow, is what do you think about the range and precision of the verbs that this kid is using? So I want you to notice the verbs that are being used, and I want you to look at things like variety, repetition, level of the word. What do you think about this? This kid is ready, getting really ready to leave ESL. Here he actually forgets to put a verb. But what do you think about the ones that he did use? What do you think about their range and precision? And you can add your thoughts into the chat box. And while you study this a little bit, I'm going to play some music for you. Okay, now I hope you recognize that.
Yes, nostalgic.
So those of you who recognize it, that's a Jeopardy theme song. And just to say it out loud, it's great when we're doing things with kids where we want them to think before they answer, and we want all the kids to think, to do something just kind of kitschy like that, where we play some music that they think might make them smile or whatever. And while they're working, it gives them time to think, and it doesn't allow the ones that just jump and want to call out every time the answer. It doesn't give them the advantage because they're always wanting to talk. But so put into the chat box what you think about these verbs, and Marie is going to read to me some of your comments.
Yes, I have one already that says that it's written like someone was speaking. Written work at this level should use more precise verbs than we would use when speaking.
Right, so this is like speech written down. And what did you think about the actual verbs? Did you notice anything about the type of verb that was in use? Anyone?
A lot of was.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Was and were and was and were. Mm-hmm. That verb to be. And what other verbs seem like they're just getting exhausted?
The verbs are basically correctly used, but overused.
Yes.
Is the use of a passive voice.
Yeah, so that's good. He's using passive tense. That's a good thing. We want to see the good with the bad.
A repetition of, I want to teach, I want to teach, I want to teach.
Yeah, she did not want to teach. She did not want. So a lot of, like, even the phrasing is just very, very repetitive. And so what this is telling you is this kid wants to feel safe. So this kid wants to feel safe. This kid is using the same verbs. Was making, want to teach, want, was, was, won, gave, died, and kept up. That's a good one. Kept up. That's a phrasal verb. And, you know, there's a few little highlights like got arrested and voted, but most of the time, and the past tense, even irregular past tense is done correctly, but it's all with safe verbs. It's all with verbs this kid has used a million times. Okay, so what about nouns and what about adjectives and adverbs? And so here in the blue highlighting are the nouns, and then in the underlining are the adverbs and adjectives. And what do you think in this case? And now I'm going to play a different theme song for you and see if you recognize it. But what about the word variety, the range and the level of words in use? And so look carefully at this while I play another theme song for you. Okay, did anyone recognize that theme song? No takers? That was Sábado Gigante.
Really?
Well, that's what it said.
Wow. I don't know it.
Yeah, maybe it's an old one because
Yes.
they were saying it was 40 years of theme songs.
I guess
So
that's
anyway, you get the idea that we try to just kind of fool around with kids and have a light tone to what we're doing. But what did you think about the words in this one?
some of the comments are that women is repeated many times.
Yes, no other word. Like I just know women and people, women and people, women and people.
Yes, also non-specific vocabulary such as thing, things.
Yeah, and they're very good noticing because when we see them start to use words like things, it means they don't know what else to call it.
And simple sentence structure such as subject, verb, predicate repeatedly.
Right, right. That's good.
Soldiers repeated twice in one sentence.
Yeah, so very repetitious, very everyday words. Same thing could be said that while there's a few words like amendment and violence and homeschool, even amendment is reported because they don't know what else to call it. And so here what we're finding is this kid has limits. And whose job is it to notice this? Well, it's our job. And even if the problem is they know other words, but they don't want to take a risk, we need to draw those words out of them. And then when you look at the modifiers, they are also very simple, like very, little, small, long, and then numbers like 14, 19, 20 million, etc. So we want to have a good look at that. And we want to make sure that when we look at a kid's sample, we're saying, we don't want to look at this and go, oh, wow, he really understood. Oh, look, yes, he's right. We don't want to pay so much attention to the content that we forget to look at the language use, especially with expanding kids. We want to really check out whether or not they're making progress in moving forward and having more variety and more rich vocabulary. Okay, so this is our job with Expanding ELS. We have to expand and refine their vocabulary. So when we see passages like this is begging us for editing and offering them other terms. We also want to help them see, oh, wait a minute, I used that noun too much. I said women too many times. Uh-oh, what else can I say besides women? And so here we want to help them have more variety to refer to the same item or concept. And we also want to help them be able to transform words into nouns, which is called nominalizations, which means changing a verb like defer to deferment, okay? Or, entertain to entertainment, something like that, right? Like we want them, like maybe they know the word in another form, but can they turn it into a noun? So they need both of these. And then we definitely want to offer them more precise and vivid verbs. And we want to to kill off these everyday verbs. We don't want to see have and go and is and was and want. We got to get rid of that. And then we also want to help them with the adjectives that they're using, including being sure that they know how to form the comparative and superlative forms of adjectives. And we want to see them using adjectival phrases as well as adverbs. And we especially want to look for adverbs because kids add adjectives first and they tend to modify their nouns, but they don't always modify their verbs. So we want to help them with that. And we want to help them have more variety in how they transition from one sentence to the next, from one paragraph to the next. In other words, those connective terms. And we want to start seeing some use of figurative language, not just when we're working on it, but all the time. Okay, so these are some of the main things that we want to be focused on when it comes to vocabulary with expanding L's. And you might want to return to this slide when you're thinking about expanding L's. So what we're going to do in our time together is we're going to review 3 types of vocabulary you should work on to advance word learning for expanding L's. I'm talking about direct teaching. Then we'll talk about the importance of teaching words in networks or bundles. We'll see 2 tools that you could use to find academic words mechanically, so that you can, within a novel, still find academic words to teach. And then also we want to talk about those context clues that you can teach when kids are all by themselves. What are they going to do to figure out the meaning of a word that they're not sure of? We'll talk about some active vocabulary practice strategies, and we'll spend 2 seconds on targeting the talk strategy and Socratic sentence frames. That these are tools that you can use in class discussions about novels, and then you can throw in the new vocabulary to those 2 strategies. Like within a sentence frame, you can make sure that you're giving practice with particular terms and phrases. So the reason that we want to do this, let's remember that the more vocabulary students have, the better their comprehension, and the better their comprehension, the more capacity they have to acquire new vocabulary because they're understanding most everything that's there, and it's just leaving a few words that they are new to them. And then because they're having good comprehension otherwise, they're likely to be able to acquire those new words because it's just very few. But when they have not enough vocabulary and limited comprehension, then they're really overwhelmed, and it's not a condition in which they can start to acquire new vocabulary on their own. So this is really a vicious cycle, we'll call it, but a positive one, because the more vocabulary we can give them, the more they're going to comprehend and the better they're going to be at finding those few new words that they can add. And we want to also remember that kids have different vocabulary sets. When kids are listening, that's their widest set of vocabulary. They understand a lot of words when they hear them that maybe when they read them, they're not understanding. And even though when they're listening or reading, they might understand a lot of words, they don't speak all of those words that they can read and understand and listen to and understand. And their smallest vocabulary set is their writing. As I just proved to you, when we looked at that writing sample, you saw that he just kept using the same words. And so this is where we have to start working with kids to get the words that they're listening to and reading to start to be spoken, to get it into their expressive language so that it just comes to them to write the word. Okay, so that's really important. So this is kind of symbiotic, that the more words that the student knows, the greater the comprehension, but at the same time, the more text they read, the more vocabulary they're going to encounter and start to understand. And we know that to acquire the highest frequency words, the core vocabulary in English, kids need to do an extensive amount of reading. So another key to thinking about vocabulary work is to get kids to read outside of school, to get them to do what's called wide reading, to start to read a lot and to enjoy reading. And by the way, they can also listen to podcasts, they can listen to audiobooks, that's equally valuable. So they don't have to be the reader necessarily, but we need to give them exposure to written text, either through audio mode or their own reading of those texts. And that means finding out what they're interested in reading so that we can feed that interest. So if they like mechanical things, let's give them a lot to read about mechanical things. If they're really curious about something related to US history, let's give them a lot about that. Whatever they're interested in, we want to really feed that interest. So I did want to show you, because I'm going to be talking today about the work of Elfrieda Hebert. I've talked about her before in sessions that I've done, but I haven't taken you necessarily to her site. So I wanted to show you, this is what her site Text Project looks like. It's an open access site. Everything on there is free. She is loading new things on here all the time because her life is vocabulary, and she understands the classroom reality. So there's a lot of really great things there. And one of the things that I wanted you to know about that's there, and that we'll be talking about, is this idea of a core vocabulary. And she has several publications that I've given you the links to about the core vocabulary that she's established. And if kids will recognize that core vocabulary of around 2,500 words, they will successfully read 90% of everything that's put in front of them. And so this is really what we want to make sure that we help them with, to make sure that what's on the core vocabulary is something that if they don't already know it, they begin to learn it. And so let me let you listen to her for a second on another point that she makes, which is talking about the fact that we should be teaching the core vocabulary and any vocabulary that we teach as networks.
Words matter. They're the way in which we express ideas and also gain new ideas. A strong and rich vocabulary is fundamental to success in school and also in life. But of the 600,000 words in written English, which words should we teach? Well, the typical response has been to pick a list of words, typically 5 to 8 words a week, often drawn from a story, and these are taught to students across the week. Take an example of a list: ruined, feast, flights, fierce. Now, when I hear that list of words, I wonder, what is the story about? And it turns out that these lists of words that are disconnected don't do a whole lot for students in expanding their vocabularies and also in helping them to retain their vocabularies. What students need is to learn networks of words that are grounded in important ideas that help them to generalize their word knowledge and to see where it can be applied in different places. Now, let me give you an example with the same story where I described ruined and feast and so on. It's a story about a boy coming of age on a visit to New York. And there are a lot of words in this text that have to do with places. Places like statues and bleachers and studios and avenues, ferries, and so on. Now, it turns out that places extend across stories. So by teaching students about different kinds of places, you're focusing children's attention on an important part of stories and giving them new specific knowledge. Now, at Text Project, we provide you support to teach students networks of words. We've just launched a product that's free, downloadable, called Core Vocabulary Project. And in this material, you've got the 2,500 word families that account for 90 or more % of the words that kids read in written English. And we've provided them in networks for different grade levels. It's through networks of words that you develop the foundational vocabulary and the ability to generalize vocabulary in new contexts.
Okay, so and you know that I've already given you the link to that, everything related to the core vocabulary. So that was back here, right? I've given you the articles, the links to the articles, and also the site that you would go to see the list of the core vocabulary. But also, she's divided it by grade level, and the one that we would use is for grades 3 to 9. And this is the words in the high frequency word list that come about in text in grades 3 through 9. And some of them are multiple meaning words, like case, a word that I've boxed there because it relates to the subject matter in To Kill a Mockingbird, the court case. But also I could have a briefcase, right? Or I could have a suitcase, right? So there's lots of cases that I could have, or I might say, well, in this case, we're talking about common words, right? So case has a lot of meanings, and you would have to know, well, which meaning am I referring to? So on this list, there are many words that will be multiple meaning words. It's not just 2 pages in length, it goes on, but I've given you the link to this, and I've also placed it on the Padlet for you, so you don't have to do anything to get it. It's right there for you. But I tried to show you that the way I would use this list is I would always be working on this list, so that when I'm doing To Kill a Mockingbird, I would look through the word list and I would say, well, what words on the word list have something to do with the subject matter of To Kill a Mockingbird? And I chose all law-related terms like case, law, order, the judge's order, represent your client, give a person a sentence, the system, the judicial system, and so forth. And you might have found other words that you thought, well, gee, that word would be a good one to do too. So when you don't just say, oh, let me teach word 1 and word 2 and word 3. You use the list as a cueing device for yourself to find words to teach that you know to be high frequency, that you want to help make certain that kids know how to read them and they know what it means, because these are in that 2,500 word list. We assume that by expanding, they know words like about, across, and, bed, right? There's a lot of there's so many simple words in the list. And another way you could do is you could just cross out words that you go, well, forget it, they know those words, and just leave it, or the other way around, highlight the ones that you think are a little more infrequent, like maybe column and so forth, just to make certain that they do know all of these words. But when we teach the word, what she's suggesting to us, and this is really critical because this is what all the vocabulary people are telling us, is you should teach words in conceptual, morphological, or functional bundles or networks. Conceptual would be all those law-related words like I just showed you. Morphological would be words that have the same prefix, suffix, or root. And functional would be all the nouns, all the adjectives, all the verbs, or some new verbs, some new adjectives, some new nouns, some new prepositional phrases. But what she brought up to you was that words belong to knowledge bases. And so if you're learning place words, like she showed you with statue and so forth, it relates to a certain knowledge base, and kids will hang on to those words better if they're taught in semantic networks. So one of the very important things we want to do is build networks with kids, make sure that they're seeing the relationship among the words, and that it's not just isolated word learning. So we could challenge wit and wisdom, the vocabulary they pick out, and we could challenge expeditionary learning. We could challenge that curriculum to say, wait a minute, in Engage New York, what words are they telling me to teach, and are they in networks? And if they are, fantastic. And if they're not, what could I do to build a network so that they would hang on to it more successfully? So she has a couple other points about vocabulary that are worth repeating. One is to remember that narratives have more rare words than informational texts, and the words repeat less, because it wouldn't be good writing in a novel if the words just get repeated, like we saw with our student that we began with. We also know that the words fall into semantic networks related to communication, because the participants or the characters in the novel are arguing with one another or speaking to each other or telling secrets about each other. They're communicating. They have emotions that are expressed in the novel. They're moving around in the novel, and they have traits that we want to be able to detect from the descriptions. So I want you to hold on to these 4 areas of communication, emotions, movement, and traits, because I'll share a resource in just a couple more slides from Text Project that you might like to know about, related to these 4 big areas that are that do characterize words, broadly speaking, in narrative text. And then finally, she says, don't focus on the number of words. And I myself am guilty of telling you, well, don't do too many words at once. And I've told you like 5 to 8, that's enough. But it's less important the number of words, and it's more important the relationship among the words. And you might be able to get a lot more words in when all of the words are related. But still, there's some critical limit that no one can learn 100 words in a day, right? So there is a critical limit here, but we will be able to get a lot more understanding of words across to kids if we do them in networks. So let's look now at the type of vocabulary that you can directly teach. And the first one, the first that we want to think about are these 3 broad areas that we should be teaching: novel related or theme related vocabulary, such as the law related vocabulary. We should be teaching ELA vocabulary like character, setting, plot, mood, tone, figurative language, things like that. And then we always want to be working on the cross-curricular vocabulary, words they're going to encounter no matter whose room they're in, no matter what teacher they're with. And we know in the theme or in the topic or in the novel, because there will be a repetition of ideas across the novel, the theme of the novel, there will be some vocabulary that gets repeated across the novel, or there will be a palette of vocabulary of similar meaning words, even though it's not rote repetition of a term. If it's talking about beauty, for example, it might use a range of words, but they're all referring to the beauty of the town or of an object and so forth. So these are our 3 learning targets. And yet we want to choose carefully, because we don't want kids to be overwhelmed, right? We don't want them to hold up the red flag and go, I've had it. I didn't get any of what you tried to teach me because it was too much. So here is a set of words that I pulled out of To Kill a Mockingbird. And I'm trying to show you here with the color coding that I would want to teach different types of words. So the words in black are nouns. The words in purple are functioning as adjectives. And I say functioning as adjectives because, of course, jury and circuit are nouns, but they function as adjectives in their usage here. And then I also have verbs and verb phrases like call into question, come to a decision. And I also have prepositional phrases that you have to learn as a phrase with the court's permission and so forth. So obviously this is too much. Across the whole novel, this is not too much, but within, just for starters, I have to decide what to work on. And of course, your kids will know some of these words, so I won't have to teach all of them. But I do want to understand that instead of just grabbing words I think the kid won't know from the novel, I want to build a network or conceptual bundle of words that matter and that should be useful across the novel. And I could do the same with prejudice and discrimination in the Jim Crow South, which is another big theme of the novel, and depression, life in the Depression, people working and not working, and so forth. So all of this, you know, there are those big areas of knowledge that I need to build across this novel, and we would want to notice that in all of our fiction. So this is the part that I asked you to hold on to, that remember Elfriede Hebert said that the words are in rich semantic networks around communication and around emotions and movement and traits of characters. And she has offered us these high frequency word sets having to do, this one has to do with communication, argue. And she's created these super synonym sets for stories where and she tries to choose a word she thinks kids will know, like argue. And then she tells them, well, there's different meanings of argue. One is debate and another is be in a disagreement. And then what are some other words I could use if I'm debating? And what are some other words that I could use if I'm in a disagreement with someone? What are some idioms? What are some cognates and some Spanish connections? And then what about the morphological family with argue? What are the endings I can add to argue and turn it into other parts of speech? Or what are the inflected endings? It stays a verb, but I change it, I change the text, or I change it another way. Okay, so here we have this is a set that she has offered us, and you could either download it singly like I have here, just choosing to download argue because you want to work on that, or you could do the whole list of high frequency word sets, and I've given you the link to that, but I've also placed it on the Padlet for you. Okay, so I wanted you to see the kind of tools that are on the text project site. And this is the kind of work that we would want to be doing when I teach a word, a really helpful word that has to do with communication. And I think arguing goes on in more than one novel or piece of literature, then it's worth spending time on and making sure that kids have other words that they could use. Another set of words that I want to teach is the ELA content vocabulary. This is all the literary terms, reading terms, revising and editing terms. And this is just giving you an idea of some of the terms I might want to get across. But I want to have a sense of all of the ELA vocabulary. So I put this list for you on the Padlet, and it's more than 2 pages, so that you can keep track of how you're doing on teaching the ELA content vocabulary, because when kids are talking about genre, we want them to use the word genre. Or if they're talking about a metaphor, we want them to use the word metaphor. Or if they're talking about it being suspenseful, we want them to use the word suspense. And so we have to build this language too, because this is the meta language to be able to talk about literature and authors and texts that they're reading. And some of the things that we're asked to do in this unit, this 8th grade unit, work taking a stand. This is in expeditionary learning, as you know. This is just some of the terms that were suggested in the unit activities. I went through the whole unit. I pulled out the ELA vocabulary that they use routinely. And then I thought, well, which would I work on? And I picked dialogue and point of view and character study and central idea and theme, because these seemed really big to me. But you could make other choices and they would be equally correct, because they're all asked to be worked on within this unit. But what I wanted to show you was that behind each of these, so behind character study or character analysis, there's even layers of words behind it, because they're going to need not just the word character and not just the word trait, but they're going to need all the words that would explain a character's traits. So there's like bundles and bundles and bundles, right? So I also put these character trait words on the Padlet because I thought they were just very highly useful. But I want you to see that behind the ELA vocabulary, whatever is the ELA vocabulary that you would find, there could be other words behind it that you're also going to have to teach. Or how am I going to talk about character traits if I don't know words like considerate or daring or fortunate or industrious? I need a lot of words to be able to talk about a character's traits, not just, oh, he's good, he's nice, and so forth. I want them to have more refined terms. So the last circle that we want to work on is the academic vocabulary. And there's two tools we could use to find academic vocabulary in novels. The first one I've shown many times, if you've gone to other PD, it's the academic vocabulary list of D. Gardner. And the way that this one works is that when I teach the word accept, I should also teach other words in the family. I don't have to teach all the words, but I should teach some other words in the family like acceptance, acceptable, unacceptable, acceptability, acceptable, acceptably, and so forth. So I want to show the kids how to build the word family, right? And we saw that from Elfrieda Hebert as well, so no disagreement. And this list is set up by frequency, with the highest frequency academic word numbered number 1, and then it continues to 3,000. It gives you 3,000 word families in order of their frequency in academic texts. So when I find a word that's an academic word that's on this list, I might want to teach the one that is the highest frequency, which would mean the lowest number. I know it can sound confusing, but the lowest number is the highest frequency. And the highest number is the lowest frequency. It doesn't happen a lot. But the way to use this list, because it's 83 pages long, I put it on the Padlet. You would download the list and you would mechanically search for words from your novel. And at first, this is quite tedious because you would open a chapter that you're about to read or a section of text that you're going to read, and you would have to make guesses yourself about words you think could be academic words on the list. And then you see if in fact they're there or they're not there. And at first, we're all kind of clumsy with this. We don't really know what to expect. But for sure, words like Atticus are not going to be on there. And words like, the names of towns and specialized words that relate to a field, like a word having to do with science words or something like that. It's not going to be there because it's too specific. Communism, it's not going to be there, even though it feels academic to you. It is academic, but that has to do with content, and it's not a cross-curricular word. It's not coming up in other content areas. So I took chapter 25, which was 4.5 pages long, and I fed words into that list the way that I just showed you. I placed words in here that I thought might be there. It took me a little while, but it wasn't impossible. And look all the words I brought up, including these words, which I couldn't fit on the page, but I wanted you to see them all on one page. And so you'll notice that trace has a very low frequency. It has a high number, which means a low frequency, whereas inform, the word that I found in the text was inform, not information, but I always list his guide word first, and then I underline the part of the word that was in the text. And I thought inform or information would be in there, and it was, and it has a high frequency because it has a low number, which means that, wow, it really comes up a lot. It's only number 21 on the list, which means it's coming up all the time. And likewise, change comes up a lot, and that's the exact word that was in the text. When I teach change, I want to teach unchanged, unchanging, changeable, changer, unchangeable, and so forth, right? So I want to teach all of those. And then I found print was there. It was in print. And then these were all of the words that were listed for that family. But I don't have to just go by the number of the frequency. Like this is a low frequency, this is a high frequency word, a high frequency word. I don't just go by that. I also go by, well, what words do I think my kids don't know? And I think they can use it a lot when they're talking about To Kill a Mockingbird. So I like prospect or perspective, like maybe that only came up when they were picking the jury, that the person was a prospective juror. Now that's not going to come up a lot. So I don't want to teach that word because it's not going to come up a lot. But maybe I do want to teach typical, or maybe I do want to teach appear, or maybe I do want to teach reason, because that's a whole part of the trial, right? So I have to use my own eyes to help myself know which of these words should I work on. And when I teach it, I should teach it as a family. Now, this involves me going into the word list and searching, taking my novel, opening it up, dragging my finger along all the words in the text, deciding what words to throw in the search box and seeing if it comes up. So I'm the one doing the mechanics. Another way to go is the academic word finder, which was talked about when we did the juicy sentences. It was talked about in the juicy sentence guidance document, but I didn't have you look at it last time. And so it's a place you can go, achieve the core academic word finder. And what you have to do is say what grade level text you're entering, and then you have to enter some text into the box. So this is the text that I entered into the box, and you can see I didn't enter a lot. And so one of the things you might have to do with the academic word finder, because it will have limits of how many words you can enter, you might have to enter paragraph by paragraph and see what words are coming up. But I do want you to experiment with these two lists and see how you like them, which one seems like it's going to work for you. And in this case, with just this amount of text, remembering this is just one paragraph, and I told the academic word finder it was 8th grade text, it told me it found 4 words in this paragraph, and 2 were below grade level and 2 were on grade level. And these are the words it pulled up. It pulled up economy, and then it told me all that it's a noun, and it told me all the possible meanings of the word economy, and it showed it in a sentence, and it gave a definition. It pulled up the word severe, and it showed me all the meanings of the word severe, and in every case it told me it was an adjective. It told me the word invest, and then it notice it's telling me the grade level at which kids should know that word. And then it tells me it's a verb. And then finally relational, and that is 6th grade and above, and it's an adjective, and it would give me the meanings if there were more than one, but in this case there was only one meaning. So this is also mechanical, but here, instead of me trying out words like I do with the academic vocabulary list, here I put in a whole passage, it scans it, and it pulls out words for me. Okay, and then I have to decide which of these meanings to teach the kids. I have to decide which of these words to go ahead and teach the kids, because I think it will happen across the book. Maybe severe is worth teaching, but maybe invest isn't, because maybe I can't talk about invest a lot in To Kill a Mockingbird, or maybe economy. So, you know, it's 6 of one and half a dozen of another, which ones of these methods are going to work well for you, but you do have to have a method to find the words. So I just want to say one more thing, and then I want to give time for you to ask questions. So once you've gone through these 3 sets of words, remember, one is theme or the novel words, the words that are right there in the novel that have to do with the theme of the novel. Then there's the ELA words, the English language arts words that I want to teach. And finally, there's those cross-curricular words. I should teach some of them too. And so I want a few ELA words, I want a few cross-curricular words, and I want most of my words to be words from the novel. Okay, so it would be 50% or more from the novel, and then maybe 20% ELA words and 20% cross-curricular words, because the ELA words can come up in other texts that I'm going to read. I don't have to teach them all in this one novel. But I would ask myself, well, is understanding this word important to understanding this selection that we're going to read? Can students use context or structural analysis to discover the word's meaning? And if the answer is yes, I'm not going to teach it directly because they can figure it out. Then I would ask myself, well, maybe it's not important to the selection, but could teaching this word help kids understand other words? And so there I might teach a word because of its ending or a root word that's inside of it. Because I think, well, this word doesn't come up a lot, but I think teaching this word could help kids understand how words work in English. So I'm going to teach it. And then mostly I want to say, well, how useful is this word? How important is it to the subject? Do I think it might appear on statewide tests? Is this an important word? Is it transferable? Is it high frequency? And that's where those frequency word lists can help me, because they tell me if it's frequent or not. They're identifying it that way. Okay, so Let's take a little pause, and you can turn your mics on for this if you have a question or a comment or a concern. And I'll give just 2 or 3 minutes for questions, because you can always write me, you know that. Anyone?
Hello, it's Marie Baston. And I like the fact that the students are learning word families as well as network of words, because I think it's going to help them remember what the words mean, because all the words are related. And that's how our brain works. Our brain is always organizing information and connecting one thing to another. So I think it's a very powerful idea to teach word networks. So thank you so much for talking about that.
Well, and that's great, Marie, because I think as teachers, we've always understood this, that they get it better if it relates, and you have more chance to use the word yourself, and they have more chance to use the word too. And when you just do these isolated words and you're teaching it because it's a tier 3 word, you know, what good does it do? Because they probably aren't going to remember it, even though in quotes you taught it. Right. So I think that I love Elfriede Hiebert's work. You probably know that because I'm always talking about her, but it makes sense, right? If you've been in the classroom with kids, you know, it makes sense.
So I have a question. I'm thinking a lot about the word generation curriculum that we use at our school. And I'm just wondering, you know, those words are not connected with a network, although like within the week, they're used across different subjects in different contexts. And I'm just wondering if you think like there's, you know, based on like all the things you've been saying, if there's any sort of modification that you would suggest for that sort of program, or if
So can you give me an example, Brooke, of like a word that you would do across the week?
so they would be like academic vocabulary that you could use across curriculum. So it could be like network, right?
Yeah, okay. But then you would say, well, what's network have to do with To Kill a Mockingbird? Right?
Right. So
Yeah, so that's where I think from those words that you're all working on, you could take a look at it within each subject, because another way that you could go is you could do more dedicated work. Like the kids would feel that you're recycling words, and you would know that you're recycling words that they're hearing in other places. But instead of just bringing the word up again and trying to make it fit, it would be better if you knew that you could make it relate to what you're working on, so you're not stepping too far away from the ELA work that you're doing. Because remember that in this work, we were thinking about ELA. We weren't thinking about other content areas.
okay, got it.
Yeah, but I wanted you to teach those cross-curricular words too, right? It was part of what I just said to you. So you
Right.
should be doing the cross-curricular words. They shouldn't overwhelm the other functions, because the most important words for you to work on are the thematic words that relate to what you're reading and the theme. Taking a stand, that's your theme. And so you want to have a lot of words that have to do with that, and then a few words that are those cross-curricular words, and a few words that are ELA words. And so you've got 3 jobs to do as it is. And so you might want to have a conversation with your colleagues to say, how about if I work heavily, and you will know it, people, you will know I'm going to work heavily of the words that we've selected. I'm going to work very heavily on these 3. And if I can work these other ones in, I will, but I'm really going to concentrate on these because I can make them work with my theme.
Okay.
Okay.
Got
But I'm not trying to take you away from a method that you're using that's working for you.
No, not at all. I think I was thinking about like teaching words in general. I wasn't looking through the lens of ELA in particular. And I think
Okay. Well, I think it's good to have subject specific words, because that is a body of knowledge, and the words are related to a particular body of knowledge that you're working on, and everything's hanging together well. Remember that for English language learners, they're always hunting for the meaning. What does this mean? What does this mean? Because it's a new language for them. And so the more we walk away from tight connections of meaning, then they start to lose it, you know, and tomorrow, maybe they learned it today, but tomorrow it's gone.
Can I just ask something very quickly? Because my school is thinking maybe of introducing word generation next year, and I looked into it. And as Brooke said, they are not taught in networks. The idea is that they are introduced within the text, and then the math teacher is using the word factor, the ELA teacher is using the word factor. So I even meant I was going to email you, Dr. Cloud, and inquire about it, because this is what has been suggested.
Yeah, you're going to see in a minute that this generative word work has a bunch of meanings, and I know that's a program. And there's nothing wrong with it per se. It's just that then the stronger the connection, like you want those inner connections. And when you're not knitting a tight little sweater, then it's tougher for the L's to hang on to it. So you could still take words from that list, but you could make it clear like which ones you feel are going to relate to what you're working on. And remember, it was created independent of the rest of your curriculum, right?
You're right. No, you're right. The idea is, I think, that every teacher teaches the word in different contexts. I don't know anything about this program.
Well, I think it's good to teach words across content. And so I agree to that part.
Yes.
And I think what you could do is make the kids aware that those are the words of the week, and that some are going to get stronger workouts in some settings and some in others, but you're all aware of what the words are. And therefore, if you just happen to be speaking and the word network came up and you weren't planning on using it or working on it, you could say, that's one of your words. You know what I mean? Like you can reinforce it incidentally if it's not important to the content that you're teaching. But I think now it's its own curriculum. You know what I mean?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So the more curricula you have that you're trying to piece together, the more demanding it is on all of you as teachers. But I'm not resisting it, because they chose words for a reason. They know those words are cross-curricular words. And you probably could look at the whole book instead of, like, they have the weekly words, right? I am assuming you could look across the whole book and say, well, here's a word that I'm supposed to do in week 8, but I could really do it during this unit. You know what I mean? Like you could hunt for opportunities, because probably there's nothing wrong with the words that they've selected. It's just that they don't relate to your curriculum directly. Because how could they? How could they publish something that would relate to everybody's curriculum?
That's tricky, yes.
Right. Okay, so let's keep going. So the next thing that we want to think about is word consciousness and how to develop it in English learners. And this is a very important concept for us to get across to kids and to make them responsible for doing this work. And where this comes from is the vocabulary book. And this is Michael Graves' book. It's in 2nd edition from Teachers College Press in 2016. It's a wonderful little book. The 1st edition was 2006. And his work is out of this world. Like Elfriede Hebert, he's always been working on vocabulary. And he says you should be working on 4 things: giving kids rich and varied language experience, teaching individual words like we just got done talking about in that program, teaching word learning strategies, and the 4th is fostering word consciousness. So let me just continue a minute further. He also says, of course, in English learners, we have to develop a basic oral and reading vocabulary. That's that core vocabulary list that Elfriede Hebert has offered us. We need to develop academic English. That's back to what we just were speaking about with that program you all are either using or considering. And we have to help kids acquire word learning strategies, how to use context clues, see word parts, understand word parts, independently use reference tools like thesauruses and dictionaries. But this concept of word consciousness is critical for expanding ELLs, because we think by this point they know a lot of words, and when they run into a word they don't know, they should be saying to themselves, oh, that's an interesting word. I wonder what that word means. They should be curious and they should take time. And this means vocabulary notebooks, most likely, that they should have a place where they're capturing these words that they're curious about. And remember, they're going to run into every 8th word out of 100 words is going to be a word they don't know. So they can't have word consciousness about every word. They can't look up every word and try to learn every word they don't know. But there should be some words that just call their attention. And we should tell them every day you should be noticing a few words that you just go, oh, what an interesting word. I never heard that word, or gee, that word looks useful. And they'll get better at this over time. But it means being aware and interested in words and word meanings, noticing when and how new words are used, and being motivated to learn new words and to try to use them skillfully. So here's a whole book with elementary and middle school examples on the word conscious classroom. But this is a critical endeavor for language and literacy teachers with expanding L's. We want those kids to be word conscious. And the way that this happens is by us doing think alouds, where we read and we go, what an interesting word. Look at that word. Wow, I'm really interested in that word. And so we're trying to help them to be alert for word choices made by authors as they read. This is written as if we're speaking to them. And we want them to find or figure out the definition of a word, to identify the feeling or mood or tone or connotation of the word based on how it's being used, to ask themselves, gee, does this feel positive or negative? Why did the author choose this word and not another word? And what other words could work here? And remember that why did the author choose this word was part of the Juicy Sentences work. But we basically need to have conversations with kids about words. We need to talk with them about how words work in English, how words are related, why authors use synonyms and other words for the same concept. And we want them to start to go, what an interesting word. Wow, I really want to see about that word. And later, while we're together, in a little while, I will be showing you some interesting vocabulary notebook layouts. But some tools that they can use when they find a word that they're interested in is the Merriam-Webster Learners Dictionary. This is for language learners. And here it gives very, very simple definitions for words, words that they will understand. They can also click on the little this little icon to hear the words spoken. And so all they have to do is go to learnersdictionary.com and they can look up a word and they can see what the word means. And so we can reward kids for doing this, right? We can have points in their grading system for being word conscious and finding some new words each week and proving to us that they're starting to use the word. Because it's not just finding words and writing down their meaning. It's also about starting to use the word. So here, delegate can be a noun or a verb, as you well know. And so we want them to hear the difference in pronunciation between I'm going to delegate this task to you or he was a delegate. It's subtle, but we want them to hear that difference in pronunciation. And I've shown you before the word hippo, where they can get a translation of a word, like consider was one of our words, or courage. And they can get a translation, or they can get definitions or synonyms or word forms, and they can hear it spoken. But we want them to independently use these tools. Okay, so any questions about that? The idea of them becoming word conscious. I mean, this is kind of a simple concept, but anything that anybody wants to say about word consciousness? Are any of your kids doing this? Or any of your kids going, oh, what's that word? That looks interesting. Well, if not, that's something that you want to start listening for, to see if you can get them to start to care about words and to start to be after words. Okay, so that's something we want them to do. So now this is a critical thing for you to be teaching. How to use the clues, the context clues, and the word morphology clues to figure out the meanings of words that they don't know, that they're encountering in text. And I'm going to show you 7 different types of clues that they need to learn how to use. But before I do that, I want to show you Now notice she's talking about a generative vocabulary, and it's not the program you guys were just talking about. This is an approach. So she's talking about a generative vocabulary approach. But let's see her little discussion of how to help kids figure out words they don't know.
What do we mean when we refer to a generative vocabulary approach? This means that we make explicit the functions and the patterns of words in text. We want students to have knowledge about how words work, so that when they encounter unknown words in text, they have the capacity to generate the meanings of those words. Now, why is such an approach a very necessary one in the 21st century? Well, we understand a lot more about our lexicon as a result of all the digitization of text that's occurred in the last decade or so. People have been able to amass large vocabularies from different kinds of text, and we understand something about the patterns within and across words in different kinds of text. And we actually want to communicate this knowledge to students. It turns out that English has a great many words, unarguably more than most languages. And we simply can't teach all the words to students. Now, it turns out there are about 2,500 morphological families that account for about 90% of the words in text from K to college and career ready. But that means from around second grade and on, there are going to be about 8 to 10 words that you haven't encountered before in text for every 100 words that you read. That doesn't mean that you can't figure out those words. That's why we're teaching a generative vocabulary approach. Perhaps some of the words are decodable, but in fact, we want to know about meaning systems, the relationships between words, to be able to support kids in figuring out those words. So keep remembering those 8 to 10 rare words, unknown words for every 100 words come from a large, large lexicon, well over 200,000 words. So you're going to keep seeing another group of unknown words across a text and also between different texts. For example, in a book with around 1,800 words aimed at third graders, typically, me and Uncle Romy, we're probably going to see about 150 words that students haven't encountered before in the past. That doesn't mean that they can't figure out those words. And remember, we're working hard to support them in having a stance and strategies for figuring out those words. Or in a chapter or portion of a book, such as Two Kinds by Amy Tan, about 4,600 words, there are about 350 rare words in that text. Words like lamented and nonchalantly, words that students may not have encountered before. So what we're doing with a generative approach is helping students anticipate that there are going to be words that they don't understand, but we're teaching them the systems for how those words are connected and also linguistic patterns within the words. So when a student sees a word like spectacle and uses their knowledge of the word of spec, like an inspect or spectator, that's an example of generative knowledge. Or if a student sees a word such as nonchalantly in a text and realizes that the author has used the word casual before, that's another example of generative knowledge being applied. Remember, writers of stories don't keep repeating the same word over and over again, so you need to use your knowledge of existing information about the character to figure out the new words. That's what a generative vocabulary approach is and why it's so critical for 21st century students.
Okay, so I don't want any of you to get confused that are using the word gen or other vocabulary programs for the academic vocabulary. When she says a generative vocabulary approach, I'm going to show you what she's talking about. First, she's saying we want to make sure that kids will understand they're constantly going to encounter words they don't know because there are so many words in English. It's just outrageous. And we want to make sure that they expect this, like it's no biggie, right? No big deal. There's another word I don't know, but that's what happens with English. And we want to make them ready to apply their context clue strategies. So we want to teach them, hey, you're always going to be finding unknown words and phrases, and it's not a reason to get upset or feel like, well, I'm not going to understand. Let's go after it. And so the types of context clues we need for kids to be able to use are first and foremost synonyms, where it might be a word or group of words that's going to tell them the meaning of a word. So for example, if they use the word sweltering and kids don't know what sweltering is, within the same sentence it might say it was so hot, it was so sweltering that the sweat was dripping off his forehead. And so now I can make a guess because there's synonym clues within the passage telling me what sweltering must mean, even though I don't know that word. I've never heard of it. I'm not sure I could spell it, but I'm getting the drift of what it is that they're talking about. Or it might have a contrast or an antonym. So for example, it might say, he was not fearless like his sister. He was afraid of new situations and avoided them at all costs. So now I know, well, he wasn't like his sister. He was the opposite, and he was afraid. I know the word afraid. So fearless must mean unafraid. Okay. And so anytime I hear a word like unlike or as opposed to or whereas, it's telling me expect an antonym or contrast type of clue. And then finally, it could be an explanation or a definition where the unknown word is actually explained or defined in the sentence in which it appears, so that here it might say something like the attorney's writing was utterly illegible. No one could read those scribbles. So now I know what illegible must mean, right? Because it's kind of telling me that it means you can't read it. Okay, so these are 3 of the 7. And what I want to make sure that I say it enough is I should be actively working on these, and I also should be labeling these context clues for kids. So I want them to know, what kind of context clue was that? Was it a synonym? Was it an explanation? Was it an antonym? What kind of clue was that? Because I want them to understand that they should be looking for these clues because quite frequently they're given. And the final one is make an inference, which means there's not a very good clue, just have to infer. And so I'd like to avoid that one if I could. But I have other ones that I could try. So sometimes it gives an example. So an example type of clue would be during the demonstration, a skirmish broke out. So the police were called to restore order. So I don't know what a skirmish is, but I'm guessing if I know what restore means, maybe I don't know that word either, but I have to try to figure out from the example that's given that, what do I think it meant that they had to try to get order back again. And maybe I look at a word and I go, well, what kind of word is this? Is this a verb? Is this a noun? Is this an adjective? And maybe I can make a guess. Like here, it's a skirmish. The skirmish broke out. So I know it's a noun because it's not a verb, because I know what broke out means. And so, here I'm getting clues from the part of speech as well. Then sometimes I get a clue from word parts, either the root or the prefix or the suffix. And cognates would fit here with morphology, because with a cognate, many of the morphemes match up, right? So whether it's Spanish or English or French and English. So here, because of inspect, spectator, spectacle, that root spec is telling me see, it's sight, I can see it. Okay, and so the morpheme, the root, is helping me know maybe what the meaning of the word, it has something to do with looking or seeing. And then finally, if nothing else works, I try to use the context of the larger passage, what came before, what came after, to figure out the meaning of the word by the mood or the events that took place and so forth. So I want you to see that there are 7, right? Synonym, antonym, explanation or definition, example, part of speech, morphology, or inference. And I want to systematically teach these 7 to kids, with this one being the least helpful, let's say, because I have to use everything available to me to make a guess. The most I can do is make a guess. Whereas here, I might get further along and have a pretty good hunch what the word means and get pretty close to its meaning. So when I'm using word morphology as a clue, these are 2 links that I gave you that you can click on to get these charts. And so here, these are from the ESL library, very common prefixes that we would want our kids to know by the grades that we're teaching in. And here it shows the endings, the suffixes that clue me that it's a noun or it's a verb or it's an adjective or it's an adverb. Okay, so you'll be able to get these just by downloading them. I did, like, I don't know why I did this, but for whatever reason, I put the roots on the Padlet. I guess I was afraid you wouldn't find it. But these are roots that we could teach. And here, like, why am I teaching this root if it doesn't appear in my novel? It should appear in my novel, else why am I doing it? Or it should appear in my reading. I shouldn't just make this a list and I teach these 5 one week and another 5 another week, because they're not going to remember it. But if it comes out of my novel, if I can make it connect to my novel, then it's worth teaching. Okay, so I definitely want to be working on morphology, word parts. And so here's another thing, the multiple meaning words, whether they're homonyms or homographs. And remember that homonyms sound the same, are spelled the same, but have different meanings. Like, I hold a pen, the animal is in its pen. Or I am holding a book, or I'm going to book a trip. I say it the same, it's spelled the same, but it has 2 different meanings. Okay. And sometimes it's a homograph. It's spelled the same, but it sounds different and it has a different meaning. So here it would be close, I close the door, or get away, you're too close and you don't have your mask on. Or object, what is that object? Or I object to your reasoning in a court case, right? So here we don't have to teach this meta language. They don't need to know this, but they need to understand that with some multiple meaning words, the word sounds identical, it's spelled identical, but it has multiple meanings. And then sometimes the word looks the same and it's spelled the same, but you pronounce it differently, and that's what clues you as to the meaning. So in a certain sense, the homograph is easier because based on its pronunciation, I might be able to guess the meaning better. But I just want you to know that as one of your language, this was one of your language standards in your next generation ELA standards. And so to work on this is really good. It's part of what you should be doing. And what we want to teach kids is look at the surrounding sentence for clues, test out the various meanings you know for the word. If none of the meanings you know work, you got to look it up and see if there's any other meanings. And then use part of speech as a guide. The animal is in the pen, I'm holding a pen. Well, that didn't help me. They're both nouns, right? But here it would, I object. I'm not holding anything. I'm not looking at something. So I object, or he objected. I know it's a verb, so it's got to mean something different than object, which is the word I thought I knew. And so I want to use other clues. I want to go back to those 7 context clues that we looked at to see what else could help me. So let's try this out. And now I'm going to play a little bit different music for you. I want you to decide what type of context clue could be used to guess the meaning of these bolded words, okay? And that happens to be the music from the movie To Kill a Mockingbird. But what did you decide? I'm sorry, I should have numbered these as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. What did you decide that was? And I didn't hear.
We said it was antonym.
Yes, it's an antonym. These are antonyms of one another, right? The erratic and the tranquility. But also, I'm given an example of what, erratic and tranquility must mean, because it says when in tranquility. If I don't know that word, her grammar was as good as anybody. So her grammar became erratic, right? So now I know it's an opposite, the antonym. Her grammar was usually as good as anybody's, but when she was furious, her grammar became erratic, right? So I'm getting double clues in this. I'm getting an antonym or a contrast, and I'm also given a little bit of an explanation. And I'm seeing that erratic is the opposite of tranquility, right? So all of that is helping me along. And I don't need to jump to inference because I'm given other things. And maybe I didn't need to figure out the part of speech either, because, I had enough help. Like, these are easier because these are meaning-based. All of the first 3 are meaning-based, and the example helps too. But here I am given an example, right? So, but what I'm trying to show you here is that if I want kids to get good at this, I have to be practicing this all the time. I have to pull some words out of whatever we're reading, and I have to have the kids, I have to find something. This takes a little time sometimes for me to find something. And then I have to see if they can figure it out and if they know what kind of clue helped them. Okay, so here's another one, a little more music. Okay, so if you showed them the movie or any part of the movie, they might recognize that. But so this one's tough because I think I know what a sound is, or don't make a sound. And then I see it used here, and then I have to figure out what it means. And I really need the whole passage to help me. But here we know that sound means no better. A court is no better than its jury, and they have to review the evidence without passion, which means they have to be fair. They have to look at the evidence. And so here we know that sound means sound judgment or good judgment. A court is only as good as its jury, and a jury is only as good as the men who make it up. And so then with restore this defendant to his family, there I do have to make an inference, right? There's nothing helping me except the phrasing of, I know it's a verb, and I see that you want to do something with this defendant to his family. And so I make an inference, well, probably if you decide that he's not guilty, he'll get to go back to his family, right? So I have to really think this through. So sometimes it's very clear. In this one, I have to use, I have to make inferences, but I also have to know, like, sound can mean solid, free from error, legally valid, as good as its jury, right? I have to be able to substitute words in there, see if I can figure out some synonyms that would fit within the meaning, and then also try to use some inferences, maybe do use the parts of speech and so forth. So we also want to teach kids they can use more than one clue to figure it out. And some of these are easier and some are more difficult. And if you're still doing any of the do nows in New York, this could be a do now. You could start this way, or this could be an exit slip. So this doesn't have to take up a lot of time. So Elfrida Hebert wrote this book in 2020 for Teachers College Press. You can see that both Michael Graves and Elfrida Hebert have worked for Teachers College Press right there in New York. And she is, this is her new book, and it's a really good one, Teaching Words and How They Work. And this is figure 5, and I threw it on the Padlet for you because this is something that we want students to learn words in networks, to understand that words are connected to the meanings of other words and that you should be using synonyms, not the same word over and over. You should be looking at word parts. You should expect multiple meaning words. You should see words in bundles or phrases. And sometimes a word origin can help you. If you know a word in French or Spanish that seems related, that could help you. So I'm just going to let you listen to a little bit of this video, and then, because it's 7 minutes long, and then you can listen to a bit more of it later. I'm just going to have you listen to the part where she talks about lists of word reminders, and then she does talk about the synonym sets, which is that argue example that I've already shown you. Okay, so let's just listen to a few minutes of this.
In this video, I'm going to talk about things that you can do to start initiating a generative vocabulary approach in your classroom. I'm a strong believer in making small changes in life. And in fact, I believe that in classrooms, making small changes is the best way in which to affect changes in students' achievement and also in their learning. We don't have to wait for a revolution. I'm going to suggest that there are 3 things. Now, I'm not saying you need to do all of them, but there are 3 ways in which you can start supporting a generative vocabulary approach. The first is through having consistent conversations with students. These conversations don't have to be long, but I want to underscore the consistency. We want to keep talking with students and keep having them talk about, remember I'm saying conversation, not a monologue. We want students also to be describing what they're anticipating when they approach a new text. Students need to be aware that the majority of the words in texts are continually going to come from this group of 2,500 morphological word families. And that in any text, they can anticipate new words related to topic, related to author style, and so on. That's a given, and students need to be aware of that, especially the part where they're understanding that the majority of words are ones they've encountered before and that they're pretty good with those words. The second way in which you can initiate small changes has to do with what I call word reminders. I've actually generated a list of word reminders on this chart. Actually, the word reminders go very, very closely with conversations. These are ways in which we summarize something we've talked about, some feature that we've had some lessons on perhaps, but that we are aware of. For example, that words cluster together in certain kinds of ways in stories and in certain ways in informational texts. We're aware that words are in morphological families across any kind of text. So having these words on a chart in a classroom, individual copies for students, this is a way in which students can review these important ideas about texts and how vocabulary works in them. The third idea has to do with some resources that I've provided at Text Project. That's the open access website that I work on. At Text Project, we've got 2 resources. One that supports small changes with regard to the synonym clusters in narrative or stories. And the second has to do with clusters of content words that you'd expect to see in informational text and also as the source of context and so on in narrative text. So the first reference is something that I call synonym sets. And these sets pertain to 20 very important networks of words. I analyzed thousands of texts to identify a group of very prolific synonym clusters. These synonym clusters fall into 4 main groups: ways of communicating, ways of expressing emotions, traits of characters and of settings, and also ways in which characters move. And I identified for each of the clusters a key word, a word that students are very likely to know, words like stop and go. And in this case, the example that I'm showing, the word argue, a word that most kids know about.
Okay, and we looked at that. So let's talk for a minute now before we move on about the context clues. And is there anything that you would like to ask, any concerns that you're having, any comments you'd like to make about teaching context clues? I don't think it's easy, but I think that with expanding kids, we absolutely have to make sure that they know how to find the clues. So just a minute or two about anything you'd like to say about teaching context clues.
I had a question just for like integrated ELA classrooms. So like for lessons that like the classroom teacher would have, how can we like integrate these strategies into the classroom activities for students? Like would the reading have to be scaffolded with the vocabulary? Like is that something that could be added on to it? Or would this have to be like a separate task for the students?
Are you saying with the context clues, Sarah?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, you would use whatever you're reading and you would find short passages in with whatever you're reading, and you would try to demonstrate that a word that maybe you think your kids don't know has an example clue or a synonym clue or a definition clue, those 7 clues. And that's what I did when I found those little passages that I shared with you. I imagined that I was teaching To Kill a Mockingbird, and then I tried to find passages that would let me practice the 7 clues. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so you don't want to leave, like I want to leave as little as necessary what I'm teaching, because I'm never going to finish, right? Like at Romeo and Juliet, I'm never going to finish. Or All's Quiet on the Western Front. I'm just never, ever going to finish if I am constantly walking away and teaching with other examples. I have to find the examples, and I want to find the examples in what we're reading. And it'll take me a little bit of time to find a, I'm going to have to probably read a little while to find where there's a passage that includes a new word that has a good clue. But I want it to come from the novel if at all possible. Even if it's not the chapter we're reading right now, maybe a past chapter.
Do you think that it would have to be like something routine that they have to practice consistently? So at some point, like depending on the time frame in the class, if they're doing like a small group activity, they can like start implementing that on their own, like identifying, like you said, like
yes, it'll be guided at first. The I do, we do, you do. You want that gradual release. You want to start it with all of you working together till you're sure that they pretty much understand it. And then you want to see if maybe they can do it with a partner, or, if you're in person. And then you want to see if they can do it by themselves. And it could be an exit slip. It doesn't have to take up any instructional time, but you're giving them practice.
Okay, thank you so much.
Yeah, but if they don't learn it, and if they don't practice it together with support, then it's going to fall apart and they won't be able to do it, and they're going to get frustrated, and we don't want that. So we want to make sure that we give sufficient guided practice that you think they're really understanding it, and then you want to give them an example that's pretty clear. You don't want to give them something obtuse. You want to give them something pretty clear so that they'll be successful, because you want them to feel like, I got it, I can do it. That's the feeling you want to leave them with.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we might not have been able to ask everything, but let's look at some ideas for practice, because we know that from research that kids have to encounter a word like 12 times, that should say times, not time, before they know it well enough to improve their comprehension. They really need access to the word. And so they need to get it as comprehensible input. They need to understand it when they see it, but then immediately they need some interaction and practice, not just to write it down with the definition. It has to be something where they actually get to actively use it. So we can start with, like, let's say I have a lot of words that I think they might not know. I can start by giving them an exit slip on Monday where I write down all the words I think maybe they don't know. And I see, well, which ones do they actually know? And I get rid of some words because I find out, gee, I never would have thought that they knew that word, but look at this, they all know it. And so this is a way, like a little assessment that I can use. And this is on the Padlet to decide what words to work on. But then I want to model for them this video, which I'm not going to play for you because it's too long. We don't have time for it. But this, you can play it later. And this is from actually a language arts teacher, not an ENL teacher. And she models in a think aloud what to do when you come upon a word that you don't know. And so she's trying to teach them what to do when you find a word that you don't know. And it's encouraging word consciousness, as is this picture book. And I don't know if you know this book, but it's called The Boy Who Loved Words. Such a cute little book. And it's available as a YouTube video, which means it's probably on Edpuzzle. And it's just trying to teach kids to love words and to be curious about words. And so these are two things that you could start with when you're dealing with that topic of word consciousness. But I did want to show you this, because this is how one teacher, an 8th grade teacher, does his vocabulary notebooks. This is a private notebook where kids that are curious about words, when they're reading, this kid found cantankerous and he goes, oh, I wonder what that word means. And then he looked it up in the Learner's Dictionary and he wrote a simple definition, but he also wrote some antonyms and some synonyms. And sometimes kids might draw pictures. Some kids might cut out photographs or magazine pictures and put it in there. Maybe they find something on the internet. Sometimes they list the part of speech. Sometimes they give themselves cues like deprive. He made up some definition that used the letter in the word. That's a little advanced. But sometimes they might want to use the sentence from the story. But you can see this kid did different things with different words. And so this was one arrangement where it's divided in fourths. The page is divided in fourths, either as quadrants or 4 segments. And another kid did it with a big X, putting words in the different parts of the X. But then the kids get credit for keeping the vocabulary notebook. And we don't want them to find a million words. We just want them to find some words that they'd like to start using. And so here, persnickety, that's a neat word. Back to the other one, barter or gilded, attribute. Like sometimes they'll choose words that are highly useful, like vague, and other times they'll choose a word that, you would really, like a tirade, how much you're going to be able to say that word. So all of this is just to show you the concept of a word notebook and how you might do this with kids to kind of develop that word consciousness. And this could be something that your expanding kids get points for. It's part of their weekly work. It could be homework. It could be things they have to do at home and they never do it at school because you don't have time for it. Another very useful thing is multiple meaning words charts. So kids could have pages of this page in their notebook. And then every time they find a new meaning for a word, like close and close or pen and pen, every time they find a new meaning for the word, they could write down the new meaning that they learned and add it to their multiple meaning chart. Okay, and I put this on the Padlet for you. Now this is still recording. This is still not giving a very big workout. This is just being conscious of the word, and that is step one, but then that doesn't mean it's going to go into your system. So we know that table has a different meaning in math than it does at home, than it does with water table, right? So as they develop those different meanings, they might write those meanings across on their multiple meaning word chart. So this is the word notebook, and the multiple meaning word chart is kind of a standard template that we could have kids always working on, but that's just step one, and then we have to get to step two. So step two would be giving practice, and here we might use this language table for talking, where I have 3 kids working together. One has to talk about Atticus, the defense attorney, one has to talk about the prosecutor, Mr. Gilmore, and one has to talk about the jury, and they have to share with each other the actions of the person that they've been given, or the character that they've been given, with the jury being a whole big conglomerate. And then they have to use the bolded words as they talk about things that happened in a chapter that they read of the trial. So here, this is just to give them ideas, like what witnesses did he call? And so the person talking about Atticus would have to say, well, he wanted to defend Tom Robinson, and so he had to call a bunch of witnesses. And when he called the first witness and he gave testimony, he said, la, 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 la. And then he called the second witness, and the second witness corroborated the evidence of the first witness. And I'm getting them to use these words, but using events from the novel. So here they have to know what happened in the chapter, but this is guiding them to use certain words when they're speaking. And it wouldn't be this person would do all their reporting and then this person would do all their reporting, because if we do it that way, this person's going to fall asleep then after they've done their part. So we would want to like work between them, give one idea, now you give one idea, now you give one idea, and they would go back and forth. And the others could ask questions. What do you mean he corroborated the evidence? I'm not understanding. How did saying that corroborate the evidence? Do you see that we're causing them to use the word over and over and over again as they report in? And that's just what we want. So I would make it clear what words I want them to use, but I want this to be a free discussion. It's not totally free, but I want it to be somewhat free, but I want to cause them to use these words over and over so they get a lot of practice. So I hope I've explained that well, but it's back to this idea of getting the interaction in practice. Fine, I write it down and I know what it means, but then where's the practice? So without the practice, you may as well have not done it, because it's not going to go in. It's just going to be in their notebook and they're never going to look at it again. So you want to make sure that you give it a lot of practice. Another thing that you could do was suggested this year at the TESOL convention by Tamara Jones, and she works at a community college, so now we're getting up there, but she does something called a whiteboard race where she puts kids in pairs. She gives each group, each pair, a whiteboard, an eraser, and a marker, then she projects words. These would be the words she would project, and then she asks questions that prompt them to race to write down the right word for the usage that she's doing. So here she would write down these 4 words, and then she would, to the pairs, she would say, this is what the whole town thought about Tom Robinson before the trial even started. They thought he was, and then they have to decide, did they think he was innocent? Did they think he was innocent? Did they think he was guilt? Did they think he was guilty? They have to write down the word that they think is the right word. Or she could say, the jury found, their verdict was that he was, and then she would keep giving clues until some pair is able to write down the correct word. And she would keep going if they write down the wrong word. Okay, so this is called whiteboard race, and this is something she likes to do. And then afterwards, she likes to ask the kids, which is the hardest for you to pronounce? Which is the hardest for you to spell? Which word is positive in tone? Which word is negative in tone? So she's trying to get them to keep saying the words. Do you see that when I say which word is positive in tone, they would say, well, innocent is positive. Innocence is positive. I want them to keep saying the word and making associations with the word. And that's the point of this activity, but it's active. And then she has a similar activity called Vocabulary Hot Seat. And here, this little girl, oops, sorry, this little girl is in the hot seat and all the other kids in the room are facing the board and they see me project the word reasonable doubt. And then these kids have to give the kid in the hot seat clues. And then from the clues that they give, she has to guess that the word is reasonable doubt or that the phrase is reasonable doubt. So this is quite similar. And I hope you're understanding that one. And then I'm hoping that when you are back in your settings, that you will share your ideas for active practice among your team members. And I'm going to show you in a minute more places where you can go for ideas if you're going, well, I wish I had more ideas. I have some, but I wish I had some more ideas. But then we want to share those ideas and we'll do a bit more of that next time. We might have a few minutes today, but I want to make sure that I finish completely with you before I come back to the sharing of ideas. But you definitely want to share your vocabulary practice strategies with your colleagues, and you want to implement the protocols and templates across the school so that kids are getting ample practice. No matter what teacher they touch down with, guess what? They're getting more practice with context clues. And so your social studies teacher can do that. Your science teacher can do context clues. You can all be doing context clues, those 7 context clues, but you take it from your text. So they haven't left the subject matter that you're teaching, no matter what room they're in, but they keep getting practice with those context clues. And I don't think learning those context clues and getting good at it is easy. And so you want to make sure that they're practicing a lot. So a couple more things for us to look at is these 2 strategies of target the talk and Socratic sentence frames. And this is where you're going to slip in some practice with particular terms and phrases. And so with target the talk, this is from the Talk Read, Talk Write Nancy Motley work. I put this on the Padlet. And she says that in order for expanding ELLs to acquire academic English, you have to make sure they're actually using the words that they're learning. And so she tells kids, she targets the talk that she wants to hear from them. And she says, I'm listening for these words. I'm listening for witness. I'm listening for innocent. I'm listening for guilty. I'm listening for solicitor. Here's the words I want to hear. It should sound like this when you're talking. The first witness corroborated the point that Atticus was making, and the second witness corroborated the evidence of the first witness, and so forth. And then if you have it on a word wall or an anchor chart, or you have words up on the smartboard, you can say, remember, as you're talking, I want to hear those words that are up on the smartboard, or whatever you say to them. Or you could say, open your notes, open your journals, make sure you're using those words while you're talking to your partner. Or as I showed you with the chart that we looked at, this one back here, I want to make sure that I'm clear. You can highlight the words right in the language table that you're asking them to use for talking. But here it's clear what words I want to hear you using because I bolded them. So anyway, and here it's clear what words I want you to use because they're up there on the smartboard. And here it's clear what word we're practicing. And I'm giving you clues for, and I'm trying to make it more memorable for you by giving you these clues and making you guess. Definitely I want to target the talk, make sure kids know what kind of talk I'm listening for. And the other thing I can do, and you're very aware of this, is the sentence frames that kids can use when they're in a seminar, when they're in a discussion. And this is where you want to ask a question, or you want to disagree, or you want to clarify, or you want to compare your point to somebody else's point. These frames, these sentence frames, don't tell you what vocabulary to practice, but they're the container that could be used for the vocabulary. Okay, so I see your point that the jury should have found him innocent, but the reason I think they found him guilty was, okay, so here I'm disagreeing. And so the frame is just getting me into the conversation, but then I have to add the specific vocabulary. Okay, so before June 3rd, what I want you to do is I want you to work on choosing.
The finishing of this workshop, I mailed it by dial you by mistake. I told you back.
on June 3rd, when we get together, we will just have 1 hour. And before we get together on June 3rd, I'd like you to think about how to choose the theme or novel or topic related vocabulary, how to choose the ELA vocabulary, and how to choose the cross-curricular vocabulary, and to try out the academic vocabulary list or the academic word finder and see how you like those. And just try it out once. It shouldn't take a lot of time. But work on choosing different types of vocabulary, and heavily you're going to feature the novel vocabulary or your text vocabulary if you're doing informational text. Work a little bit on the word consciousness with your students, see how that goes, help them be alert for author's word choices, help them to use the Learner's Dictionary or Word Hippo when they find a word. And you want them to do this independently. You don't want them to say, Miss, what does this word mean? You want to say, oh, you found a really good word. Let's look that up. And so you want to pass it back to them and make them responsible. And the last thing I want you to practice are those context clues. So I want you to work a little bit on word consciousness, on context clues, and on choosing different types of vocabulary. So you get a little practice for that. And if possible, I'd like you to try a new to you active vocabulary practice activity. Okay, so the ones that I just shared with you, or here are some more. So I did show you these books, and they will give you ideas. I'm not expecting that you're going to run out and buy them, but this could be good summer reading if you're interested. Michael Graves is wonderful. And I would recommend, if you're only going to get one book, get this one, because this one does more primary kinds of examples. I think this would suit your grade levels better. This is good. It will give some elementary examples, but that's okay. I think you can extend them to middle school, and it does give middle school examples as well. This is the new book of Elfriede Hebert, a 2020 book, and this is her text project. It's completely free, so you definitely want to go there. And then Coloring Colorado gives you some ideas for teaching vocabulary, and these are all good ideas. There's nothing wrong with any of these ideas. So this you might want to review. This is for grades 4 through 12. And then don't forget about Larry Ferlazzo. He posts, I think, every single day. He has a blog. And so here's a link to 5 strategies for ELL vocabulary instruction that he uses. He's a high school teacher, so he's like, it wouldn't be far off for you, the ideas that he has that we should work in middle level. And so that's it. That's what we were doing. Now, remember, if you didn't get to ask some questions before we get together on June 3rd, you can find me at this address or this address. And you can send me any questions. We're right at 2:20, and I don't want to keep you unnecessarily, but we will look at the chat. So please give us feedback in the chat if there's something that you would like to say. Put in there if you want the CTLEs. I don't know, Maria, if there are other announcements you guys want to make from NYU.